we kind of grow up knowing things aren't quite equal.
It's still a problem, and it's always been a problem.
And I am much more concerned about what we're going to do about it than why it's happened.
But hopefully it is a reality we can actually change because it's one we created.
Tonight, a bold and graphic dramatization of Canada's gender pay gap. Maclean's magazine is asking men to fork over 26% more for its latest issue, which has 2 different covers. And we welcome Maclean's editor-in-chief, Alison Uncles. First of all, what a fascinating idea to do and pull off. But I must say that men aren't being forced to pay the extra. It's their choice.
Absolutely. If you're a man, you can absolutely buy the women's cover. And if you're a woman, you can buy the men's cover. If you identify one way or the other, it's completely your choice. But the differential on the men's cover is being donated to Inspire, which is an Indigenous-led charity. And they've agreed to channel that money to a women's charity, to a women's scholarship.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So why now? I mean, this issue has been talked about for years.
Mm-hmm.
Every year during International Women's Day, there are the stats.
Right.
What made you do this now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We actually started chatting about it a little while ago, almost 2 years ago, based on a story out of Australia where some students sold cupcakes at a bake sale. And they priced them differently, again, to illustrate the pay equity gap in Australia. And there was a ferocious social media backlash at that time. And it came up at our news meeting, and our deputy editor, Colin Campbell, at the time said, we should try that here. What would happen if we did it in Canada? And as we saw the Me Too movement morph over the last few months from a discussion around sexual assault and sexual harassment and moving towards discussion around power and money, we thought this is a perfect time to do this.
Interesting. And what is the reaction? Were you bracing for the backlash that occurred in Australia?
We thought there would be a chance that we could experience some of that, so we've been watching social media carefully today. And I would say it was nowhere near as bad as we thought it would be. In fact, it's been mostly positive. We did a kind of a sentiment tracking on Twitter today. Mm-hmm. Definitely there were some men who were upset with us. Some had a great sense of humor about it. One said he wanted to send the wife down to the store to buy the magazine, and I hope it was tongue-in-cheek. There were some people who were denying the existence of a pay equity gap, and that's an interesting kind of discussion to engage in. And then definitely there was a small minority of trolling. But overarchingly, I'd say it was a really spirited, great conversation we saw out there today.
Interesting, interesting. And when you look at the workforce, are there different areas, different types of work that women do where they are on par or where the differences are more glaring?
Right. Well, it's interesting because one of the studies we talked about in our main narrative centered on a Stanford study where they looked at industries where men had been predominant and women kind of came into those industries like biology and design, and the salaries actually decreased in those industries. And industries where women had been prominent, like computer programming, and men came in, the salaries decreased. So it's just so fluid, and industries that were dominant in one sex or another are, change salary-wise over the years. Really difficult question to answer just because it's so fluid.
Right. And is the gap narrowing?
That's the incredible thing that we've learned in our research, is that over the last 30 years in Canada, the pay equity gap has barely budged. It's astonishing, really.
Really?
Yeah.
And yet more women are in the workforce, more women have university degrees than ever before, and it's barely budged. I find that shocking.
Isn't that incredible? In fact, yes, Catherine McIntyre, who wrote our main story, got back in touch with a woman who was kind of a pioneer in this field, who was really pushing for pay equity in the 70s in Canada. And she called her up and kind of broke the news to her in terms of what the percentage is now, and the woman was aghast and thought, I just can't believe after all this time, I thought it would be solved by now.
All right, well, Alison Uncles, always a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.